My name is Leah, and I am 32 years old. Today, my carefully rebuilt life in Portland was shattered by a single envelope. After 13 years of silence since my parents kicked me out for refusing to follow their oppressive religious rules, a letter arrived. I stood in my kitchen trembling as I read words that made their original betrayal seem almost kind in comparison. How could they possibly have stooped even lower than abandoning their own daughter? While I gather my thoughts to tell you what was in this letter, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for this shocking family revelation. I grew up in a small conservative town in rural Wisconsin where everybody knew everybody and church attendance was as mandatory as breathing. My parents, Thomas and Margaret Wilson, were pillars of our local community. Dad served as a deacon at First Covenant Church, his stern face and ramrod posture commanding respect wherever we went. Mum, with her perfectly styled hair and modest dresses, was the quintessential homemaker who ruled our household with biblical quotes and constant vigilance. Our family home was a beautiful two-story colonial with white siding and black shutters. Picture perfect from the outside. Inside those walls, however, was a different story entirely. Every aspect of my life was controlled. What I wore, who I spoke to, what music I listened to, even the books I read, were strictly monitored. Movies were pre-screened, internet usage was logged, and my phone calls were frequently interrupted with Mum needing to check something in my room. My younger brother Adam had it easier. He was the golden child who embraced their religious fervour, memorized scripture for fun, and never questioned a single rule. 4 years younger than me, he watched with wide eyes as I received punishment after punishment for my smallest infractions. A hemline too high arriving home 3 minutes after curfew, or being caught with a teen magazine hidden under my mattress, all resulted in lengthy lectures about purity, obedience, and the path to salvation. Art became my secret refuge. I would hide drawing supplies in a hollow space beneath my bedroom floorboards, waiting until everyone was asleep to create. Under moonlight filtering through my curtains, I would sketch scenes of freedom, bright city skylines, and women with wild hair running through open fields. These drawings were my dreams, given form my only true expression in a life of stifling control. High school brought my first real taste of rebellion through my friendship with Zoe Ramirez. She transferred to our school sophomore year, bringing stories of Chicago, purple-streaked hair, and a carefree laugh that felt like pure sunshine. My parents despised her on sight. "That girl is trouble-walking Leah," Mum warned after meeting Zoe once. "I can see the worldly influence all over her. Your father and I agree you should find more godly friends." But Zoe showed me possibilities. Through her stories and our secret hangouts at the library where we could claim to be studying, I glimpsed a world beyond our small-town boundaries. She encouraged my art, smuggled me art magazines, and talked about college applications when my parents insisted I would attend our local Bible college while living at home. When my acceptance letter from Chicago Art Institute arrived senior year, I thought my heart would burst with excitement. I had applied in secret using Zoe's address for correspondence, saving babysitting money for application fees. The scholarship offer would cover almost half my tuition. This was my ticket to freedom. The explosive argument that followed my announcement lasted 3 days. Dad threatened to disown me. Mum cried for hours, claiming I was abandoning my faith and family. Eventually, a compromise was reached, though it felt more like another prison sentence. I could attend art school, but only while continuing to live at home and commuting the 90-minute drive each way. I would maintain a strict curfew, attend church 3 times weekly, and submit all assignments for parental review to ensure they contained nothing morally objectionable. My first year of college was exhaustion personified. The daily commute drained me physically, while the constant scrutiny at home crushed my spirit. I watched other students stay late to work in studios, attend gallery openings, and build the connections so vital in the art world, while I rushed to my car every afternoon, constantly checking the time. The freedom I had yearned for remained tantalizingly out of reach. Then I met Jake in my color theory class. Tall, with thoughtful brown eyes and a quiet confidence, he noticed my rush to leave each day and eventually asked why I never joined study groups. Something about his genuine interest broke through my carefully constructed walls. Over lukewarm coffees in the student centre during the brief window before my drive home, I shared glimpses of my reality. Jake introduced me to perspectives I had never considered. Raised by progressive parents who encouraged critical thinking, his worldview was built on compassion rather than rigid rules. We debated philosophy, art, religion, and purpose. For the first time, someone listened to my thoughts without judgment, encouraging me to question and explore. Our relationship deepened into my first real romance, conducted through stolen moments between classes and carefully deleted text messages. With Jake's support, I began constructing small acts of independence. I told my parents about fictional study groups that required my presence, gaining precious extra hours in the city. I kept a change of clothes in my car, switching from mum-approved modest outfits to comfortable jeans and vibrant tops that expressed my personality. Each tiny rebellion was terrifying and exhilarating. When Jake invited me to join him and friends for a weekend art festival in Michigan, I created an elaborate lie about a female classmate's family gathering. For 3 glorious days, I experienced freedom. We walked along Lake Michigan at sunset, attended experimental art installations, stayed up talking until dawn, and shared our first real kiss under stars that seemed to celebrate with us. I felt alive, authentic, and seen for perhaps the first time in my life. Reality crashed back with devastating force when I returned. Mum was waiting at the door, my phone records in hand. Someone from church had seen me with Jake at a gas station on the way out of town and immediately reported back. They had spent the weekend calling hospitals, convinced I must have been in an accident, since their Leah would never lie. Dad's face was purple with rage as he threw Jake's name at me like an accusation. "We know about this boy. We know you spent the weekend with him. No daughter of mine acts like some common whore." The word hung in the air between us, a knife to my heart. In that moment, something inside me hardened. I straightened my spine and looked directly into his eyes. "I am not what you just called me. Jake is a good person who treats me with respect, which is more than I can say about what I just heard from my own father." Mum gasped at my defiance. Dad's ultimatum was immediate breakup with Jake, recommit to our family values, or leave his house forever. "This is not a negotiation, Leah," he said, voice cold as January ice. "You will end this relationship immediately and surrender your phone and car keys. You will be driven to and from your classes by your mother until you have proven your repentance. Or you can choose your sinful path and no longer be welcome under this roof." As he spoke, Mum stood behind him, tears streaming down her face as she clutched her Bible, whispering about prodigal children and God's forgiveness for the truly penitent. The manipulation was so obvious now that I had experienced something different. This wasn't love, it was control disguised as concern. "Then I choose to leave," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside me. "I choose to live my own life." The shock on their faces might have been comical in another context. They had never expected me to actually choose departure over submission. Dad recovered quickly, his expression hardening. "You have 1 hour to pack essentials. Anything you leave behind belongs to us." The next 60 minutes were a blur of panic and heartbreak. I grabbed my backpack and one suitcase, focusing on practical necessities while trying to ignore my mother's performance in the hallway. She alternated between tearful pleas to reconsider and sharp reminders of my spiritual failings. "Please, Leah, don't throw away everything for some boy. This isn't you. This is the devil's influence." I moved mechanically, packing clothes, my laptop, sketchbooks, and the small cash stash I kept hidden in an old stuffed animal. There wasn't enough time to properly sort through 19 years of existence. With each item I selected, I was making impossible choices about which pieces of my past would come with me. Through my bedroom doorway, I glimpsed Adam watching from his room. At 15, his face reflected confusion and fear, but he remained silent. When our eyes met, he quickly disappeared into his room. Another loss to add to the growing pile. My hands trembled as I grabbed the framed photo of my grandmother, the only family member who had ever truly seen me. She had passed away years earlier, but her gentle encouragement of my artistic talents had been my lifeline during darker times. I wrapped it carefully in a sweater and tucked it into my bag. "Your time is up," Dad announced from the doorway, checking his watch with exaggerated precision. As I dragged my hastily packed belongings downstairs, I noticed Dad had already removed my house key from my keyring, which sat on the entry table. Mum stood by the front door, her expression a battlefield of emotions. For one moment, I thought she might intervene, might stand up to Dad and stop this madness. Instead, she pressed a small envelope into my hand. "For emergencies," she whispered. "Don't tell your father." Inside were 3 $20 bills, $60 to start a new life. The inadequacy of this gesture hit me like a physical blow. I stepped onto the porch and heard the definitive click of the lock behind me. Through the window, I watched Dad immediately pick up the phone, likely calling the locksmith to change the locks. The message was clear: there would be no coming back. Standing on the sidewalk outside my childhood home, the magnitude of what had just happened began to sink in. I was 19, essentially homeless, with less than $300 to my name. I called Jake from the corner of my street, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation. He immediately offered his apartment as temporary shelter. Jake's studio apartment near campus became my refuge for the next 2 weeks. Barely 500 square feet with a mattress on the floor, a sagging couch and a kitchenette, with a perpetually dripping faucet, it was a far cry from my comfortable suburban home. Yet the absence of judgment and control made it feel like paradise, despite the cramped conditions. Reality intruded quickly. Jake's roommate Travis initially tolerated my presence, but grew increasingly frustrated as days passed with no resolution. I overheard their tense conversation through the thin bathroom wall one night. "Dude, I signed up for 1 roommate, not 2. I feel like I can't even walk around in my underwear anymore. She's got nowhere to go, man. Her parents literally kicked her out." "That sucks, but it's not our problem. My girlfriend's annoyed she can't stay over with Leah, always here. You need to figure something else out." My frantic calls to extended family were exercises in disappointment. My mother's sister Aunt Patricia answered with initial sympathy that quickly dissolved when I explained the circumstances. "While I feel for your situation, Leah, your parents are good Christian people who want what's best for you. Perhaps this is a lesson in humility the Lord feels you need." Grandparents, cousins, even my formerly favourite uncle, all expressed variations of the same sentiment: I should apologise, submit to my parents' authority and return home. Nobody offered concrete help. The single exception was Aunt Susan, my father's younger sister, who had always been the family black sheep herself. She called me secretly after hearing the news. "I can't take you in, Leah," she said, regret evident in her voice. "Richard would never allow it, and challenging your father publicly would cut off my access to Adam. But I can send you some money to help get you established." Her wire transfer of $500 was a lifeline accompanied by a warning that this would be all she could provide without raising suspicion. I thanked her through tears, promising to make it stretch as far as possible. The financial reality of my situation hit like an avalanche. My tuition payment was due, rent would need to be paid if I found my own place, and basic necessities like food and transportation costs added up quickly. Working through my options with a calculator late into the night, I reached the unavoidable conclusion I would have to drop out of art school. Withdrawing from my classes was one of the hardest moments of my young life. Each signature on the paperwork felt like erasing pieces of my dream. The financial aid officer seemed genuinely concerned, explaining that leaving mid-semester meant I would still owe partial tuition and my scholarship would be forfeited. With Jake's help, I found a tiny studio apartment in a neighborhood he hesitantly described as transitional. The reality was far worse than the euphemism suggested. Sirens provided nightly soundtrack, mysterious stains decorated the hallway carpet, and I quickly learned to identify gunshots versus fireworks. But at $400 monthly for a space with its own bathroom and kitchenette, it was the only option my budget allowed. Supporting myself required multiple jobs. Mornings began at Sunrise Coffee at 5 a.m., where I learned to operate industrial espresso machines and deal with cranky pre-caffeine customers. Afternoons and some evenings were spent at Discount Fashion, a clothing retailer, where I folded endless stacks of garments and endured a manager who seemed to take personal pleasure in scheduling me for the least convenient shifts. Weekends were devoted to bartending at the Underground, a dive bar where my lack of experience was overlooked due to my willingness to work Sunday nights when no one else wanted to. Working 70-plus hours weekly left little time for basics like sleeping or eating properly. My diet consisted primarily of expired pastries from the coffee shop and staff meals from the bar. I lost weight rapidly, my clothes hanging loosely on my increasingly bony frame. The bathroom mirror reflected a stranger with hollow eyes and dull hair. Physical exhaustion was constant, but the emotional toll proved even heavier. One evening, after my card was declined, while attempting to purchase toothpaste and ramen noodles, I suffered a complete breakdown in the fluorescent aisles of Save Mart grocery store. Crumpling against the toiletries display, I sobbed uncontrollably, while an uncomfortable cashier called for a manager. The shame of being escorted outside still crying would have been unbearable had I any emotional capacity left for additional feelings. Jake tried to remain supportive, but the carefree college relationship we had enjoyed transformed under the weight of my circumstances. Our rare time together was overshadowed by my exhaustion and growing depression. Instead of conversations about art and philosophy, I found myself falling asleep mid-sentence or breaking down over small disappointments. "I don't know how to help you," he finally admitted 6 months after my eviction. "I care about you, Leah, but I'm 19 too. I can't fix this, and watching you suffer is destroying me. I think we need to take a break." His words, while delivered gently, felt like the final abandonment. I had lost my family, my education, and now the person who had represented hope during my darkest moments. That night alone in my apartment, with its persistent cockroach problem and temperamental heating, I questioned whether any of this struggle was worthwhile. Rock bottom arrived during Chicago's brutal January. Laid off from discount fashion during post-holiday downsizing, I found myself short on rent, despite picking up additional barista shifts. The building manager, unsympathetic to my situation, gave me 3 days to pay in full or vacate. When my ancient Honda refused to start one morning, the repair estimate exceeded my bank balance by hundreds. With nowhere to turn and temperatures dropping below zero, I spent 3 nights sleeping in my car in the coffee shop parking lot, starting the engine periodically for brief bursts of heat. Terrified of both freezing and running out of gas, wrapped in all the clothes I owned, shivering despite multiple layers, I watched normal lives unfold through brightly lit windows. Families gathered around dinner tables, couples walked dogs on evening strolls, college students carried instrument cases and backpacks to and from activities. All these mundane moments of belonging seemed as distant as another universe. It was Diane who finally intervened. A 50-something barista with silver-streaked hair and perpetually paint-stained fingers, she had noticed my deterioration over several months. When I arrived for my shift wearing the same clothes as the previous 2 days, eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion and cold, she pulled me aside. "You've been sleeping in your car, haven't you?" she asked without preamble. When I attempted denial, she cut me off with a raised hand. "Don't bother lying. I recognize the signs. Grab your things after shift. You're coming home with me tonight." Diane's third-floor walk-up apartment was cluttered with books, art supplies, and mismatched furniture that somehow formed a coherent whole. Potted plants thrived on every windowsill, and the walls displayed an eclectic collection of artwork, some clearly her own. After showing me to a small but clean spare bedroom, she made us both massive mugs of tea and sat me down at her kitchen table. "Now tell me everything," she said, "and don't leave anything out." Something about her matter-of-fact kindness broke through my carefully constructed walls. The entire story poured out between sobs. My parents, eviction, the struggle to survive, dropping out of school, Jake's departure, my current homelessness. Diane listened without interruption, occasionally pushing tissues my way. "You can stay here until you get back on your feet," she said when I finally ran out of words. "No rush, no pressure. Everyone needs help sometimes." For the first time in months, I slept through the night in a warm, safe place. The simple gift of security allowed my perpetually vigilant mind to finally rest. I woke disoriented momentarily, forgetting where I was before the scent of coffee and frying bacon reminded me of Diane's unexpected kindness. Over breakfast, she introduced me to her plan. My niece Maya works in admissions at Chicago Community College. Much more affordable than art school with evening classes that would work around your jobs. She can help you navigate financial aid. I started to protest that I couldn't accept such generosity, but Diane waved away my objections. "I'm not giving you handouts, kid. I'm giving you a fighting chance. There's a difference. Plus, having someone else around makes this place feel less empty since my partner moved to Seattle last year." Maya proved to be a godsend. A no-nonsense woman with an encyclopedic knowledge of financial aid loopholes, she helped me apply for grants specifically targeting independent students and walked me through paperwork for subsidized loans with manageable interest rates. Within 2 weeks, I was enrolled in a graphic design associate program with classes scheduled around my work hours. My first holiday season alone hit harder than anticipated. While Diane invited me to join her family celebration, I declined, not wanting to intrude on their traditions. Instead, I worked double shifts at the coffee shop and bar, grateful for the distraction and extra income. Still walking home on Christmas Eve, passing houses with twinkling lights and families visible through windows, unleashed an ache so profound I could barely breathe. In a moment of weakness, I sent a Christmas card to my parents' address. The carefully composed message expressed nothing of my struggles, merely conveying that I was safe and thinking of them with my new phone number included. I received no response. The community college courses revealed an unexpected gift. I had genuine talent for digital design. The technical skills came naturally, and my art background gave me advantages in composition and color theory. My first portfolio, though rudimentary, showed promise that caught my instructor's attention. "You have an instinctive understanding of visual communication," Professor Harmon told me after class. "Keep developing your technical skills, and there's real career potential here." His encouragement motivated me through exhaustion and self-doubt. I began staying after class to access the professional software I couldn't afford for my ancient laptop, creating additional projects beyond required assignments. The creative work nourished something essential that had been starving inside me. A turning point came when I entered a local design competition on Professor Harmon's suggestion. My poster design for a community arts festival won first place, carrying a modest cash prize, and more importantly, recognition from professionals in the field. The victory provided validation. I desperately needed proof that my new path had genuine merit. Graduation arrived 18 months after enrollment. I had maintained a 4.0 GPA despite continuing to work multiple jobs, gradually shifting from service work to freelance design projects as my skills developed. Diane cheered loudly from the audience as I crossed the stage to receive my associate's degree, her presence filling a fraction of the family-sized hole in my heart. The same week, I received a job offer from Urban Pixel, a small design agency in Portland, specializing in work for nonprofits and community organizations. The starting salary, while modest by industry standards, represented unimaginable financial stability compared to my recent existence. They needed someone immediately and offered relocation assistance, a sign of their genuine interest in my portfolio. Saying goodbye to Diane was bittersweet. She had become the supportive adult figure I'd always craved, offering guidance without control, affection, without conditions. "I'm not worried about you anymore," she said, hugging me fiercely at the bus station. "You're going to be more than okay. Just don't forget to help someone else when you're stable. That's how we change the world, one person at a time." Portland welcomed me with its quirky charm and creative energy. My studio apartment, while small, featured large windows, functional appliances, and blessed freedom from pests. The neighborhood offered walkable access to parks, coffee shops, and public transportation. After years of constant struggle, the simple pleasure of a safe, clean home brought daily gratitude. At Urban Pixel, I found not just employment but community. My colleagues shared passion for design with purpose, creating visual identities for organizations working toward positive change. The collaborative atmosphere encouraged growth and experimentation, while the structured environment provided stability I hadn't realized I craved. My supervisor, Gabrielle, became both mentor and friend, pushing me to develop my skills while respecting my boundaries. Slowly, I built a chosen family from connections at work, neighbors in my apartment building, and fellow members of a community art studio I joined. These relationships developed gradually, my trust issues creating constant hurdles. Each time I allowed someone new past my carefully constructed defenses, it felt like a minor miracle. 7 years passed in Portland, bringing professional accomplishment and personal healing. At 32, I barely resembled the terrified 19-year-old who had been evicted with a single suitcase. My career flourished after promotion to senior designer at Urban Pixel, my portfolio filled with award-winning campaigns and a growing reputation in the industry. Financial stability allowed me to purchase a small but charming condo, every paint color and furniture piece selected with deliberate care. Most importantly, I had reclaimed my personal artistic voice. Evenings and weekends frequently found me in my home studio space, creating mixed media pieces that processed my journey through color and form. Several had even sold through a local gallery, though commercial success remained secondary to the emotional release these works provided. Therapy had been a crucial component of my healing journey. Initially resistant to revisiting painful memories, I eventually found an insightful therapist who helped me understand the abandonment trauma and religious abuse underlying my persistent anxiety and trust issues. Through her guidance, I developed tools to manage triggers and recognize unhealthy relationship patterns before repeating them. Ryan entered my life unexpectedly through a nonprofit client project. As the organization's communications director, we collaborated closely on a rebrand campaign. His thoughtful feedback and respect for my expertise creating an easy professional rapport. When the project concluded successfully, his invitation to celebrate over dinner, shifted our connection towards something personal. Unlike previous relationships hampered by my reluctance to share my past, I found myself gradually opening up to Ryan about my family history. His response exemplified the compassion and emotional intelligence that increasingly defined our relationship. "Thank you for trusting me with your story," he said, reaching for my hand across the restaurant table. "It helps me understand you better. And for what it's worth, I think your parents lost something irreplaceable when they chose their rules over their daughter." Information about my family arrived sporadically through hometown connections and Aunt Susan's occasional updates. Dad had been appointed head pastor at First Covenant Church 3 years after my departure. His reputation for unwavering moral standards apparently enhanced, rather than diminished, by cutting off his wayward daughter. Mum continued her role as perfect pastor's wife, though Susan mentioned increasing health issues she attributed to stress and heartache. Adam had followed the prescribed path, attending the same Bible college my parents had chosen for me, marrying a girl from the church, and quickly producing 3 children. Facebook photos showed a man who physically resembled my brother, but whose eyes held none of the curiosity and mischief I remembered from our childhood. His perfectly coordinated family photos projected happiness without revealing whether any existed behind the images. The hollowed-out space where family should have been ached most sharply during holidays and milestones. Buying my condo should have warranted proud parents touring the space, perhaps bringing housewarming gifts and offering decorating suggestions. Major work accomplishments went uncelebrated by those who had known me longest. Each birthday passed without the calls or cards that most people took for granted. I had constructed a good life filled with meaningful work and genuine connections. Most days, the absence of biological family registered as background noise rather than acute pain. I had learned to embrace chosen family as equally valid and often more nurturing than those connected by genetics alone. Then came the letter. A perfectly ordinary Tuesday in September began with my usual routine morning run through the neighbourhood. Breakfast smoothie commute to the office. Nothing suggested the impending earthquake that would shake my carefully reconstructed foundation. The notification arrived via email, a certified letter awaiting collection at the post office. Curious but unconcerned, I stopped after work, expecting perhaps tax documents or something related to my condo association. When the postal worker handed me the envelope, I recognized the handwriting immediately. My father's distinctive script unchanged after 13 years, addressing me as Leah Ann Wilson, with formal precision. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, heart racing, unable to open the envelope or start the engine. The past I had worked so hard to process and move beyond had suddenly materialized in my hands. Why now, after all this time, what could possibly warrant breaking 13 years of silence? With trembling fingers, I finally tore open the envelope, revealing several pages of formal stationery bearing the letterhead of First Covenant Church, along with legal documents and what appeared to be photographs. Dear Leah, the letter began the formality of address, already a knife twist. Not our daughter, or even my daughter, but simply my name, as though addressing a distant acquaintance. I am writing to inform you of significant developments within our family that require your attention and response. After much prayer and consultation with church elders, Margaret and I have decided to reach out, despite our fundamental disagreements regarding lifestyle and values. I have been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Prognosis indicates approximately 6 months of remaining earthly life before I join our Heavenly Father. While my spiritual affairs are in perfect order, certain temporal matters require resolution. You may be unaware that following your departure, God blessed our family with another child. Your sister Jessica Ann is now 10 years old and has been raised in accordance with biblical principles and family traditions. She is unaware of your existence, as we deemed knowledge of your chosen path inappropriate for a child's spiritual development. As I prepare to meet my Maker, I am organizing my earthly affairs, including the Wilson family property and assets. While your choices removed you from our family fellowship, legal technicalities may still entitle you to certain inheritance claims that could complicate provisions for Jessica's future security. Enclosed, please find legal documents prepared by our church council. These would formally relinquish any claim to family assets or property, ensuring Jessica's inheritance remains intact and uncontested. We request your signature and notarized return of these documents at your earliest convenience. Should you wish to discuss this matter in person, Margaret and I are willing to meet at the church office with our pastor present as witness and spiritual guide. Please contact my secretary to arrange such a meeting. In Christian concern, Thomas Wilson, senior pastor. A handwritten note in my mother's familiar script was appended to the bottom of the final page. Leah, I have always loved you despite your sins. Please consider your father's request as his time grows short. For Jessica's sake, if nothing else. Mum. The photographs slipped from my numb fingers onto the car floor. I retrieved them with shaking hands. A girl with my eyes and nose smiled from a school portrait. Another showed her in a flowered dress beside our parents, Dad noticeably thinner than I remembered, but with the same stern expression. The third picture captured her playing piano in what appeared to be the church sanctuary. A sister. I had a 10-year-old sister I had never met. A sibling whose existence had been kept from me, while simultaneously my existence had been erased from her reality. When Ryan found me still sitting in my parked car, 2 hours later, the document spread across my lap, my face was dry, but my mind was in chaos. I wordlessly handed him the letter, watching his expression shift from concern to shock to outrage as he read. This is emotional manipulation at its most disgusting, he said finally. They ignored you for 13 years, hid the existence of your sister, and now they want you to sign away inheritance rights without even a proper conversation, and they're using his illness as leverage. His indignation on my behalf was both comforting and clarifying, but the revelation that truly gutted me came later that evening. After calling Aunt Susan to confirm the cancer diagnosis, she hesitantly shared what my father's letter had conveniently omitted. There's something you should know, Leah, she said, her voice laced with reluctance. The story they told about you to the community and Jessica, it's not just that you left to live a different life. Thomas and Margaret told everyone you abandoned the family after stealing money from the church building fund. They claimed you were involved with drugs and possibly prostitution, that all attempts to help you were rejected. The manufactured narrative explained why no one from my past had reached out, why extended family had shunned me. My parents hadn't merely rejected me, they had systematically destroyed my reputation to control the narrative, ensuring I would remain isolated and discredited. And they had told these vicious lies to my sister, a child who should have had the chance to form her own opinion about her older sibling. The eviction that had once seemed the ultimate betrayal now appeared almost merciful in comparison to this calculated character assassination. They hadn't just thrown me away, they had actively worked to ensure I would be seen as deserving of abandonment. After 3 therapy sessions and countless hours of discussion with Ryan, I made the decision to return to Wisconsin, not to sign their documents or provide the absolution they sought, but to reclaim my narrative and perhaps establish some connection with the sister who had been denied knowledge of my existence. Are you sure about this? Ryan asked as we packed the car for the drive. You don't owe them closure or forgiveness. This isn't about them, I explained, folding the last of my clothes into an overnight bag. It's about me, and about Jessica. She deserves to know she has a sister who never chose to abandon her. The 16-hour drive from Portland to Wisconsin provided ample time for preparation and anxiety. Ryan offered to join me in meetings with my parents, his solid presence a reminder that I was no longer the vulnerable teenager they had discarded. We rehearsed potential scenarios, developed boundary statements, and identified red flags that would signal time to exit conversations. Arriving in my hometown was surreal, like stepping into a faded photograph. The small downtown looked virtually unchanged, the same storefronts and municipal buildings, creating a backdrop that triggered involuntary muscle memory. I found myself automatically slowing the car near the ice cream shop where teenage curfew violations had once earned parental lectures. We checked into a chain hotel on the edge of town, rather than staying with extended family, preserving independence and privacy during what promised to be an emotionally volatile visit. After a restless night, I called the number listed on my father's letterhead, requesting an afternoon meeting at their home rather than the church office he had suggested. I want to meet Jessica, I explained to the secretary. That can only happen at their house. The familiar colonial with its white siding and black shutters looked meticulously maintained, but somehow smaller than memory suggested. Flower beds displayed the same orderly arrangement of perennials my mother had always favoured. The porch swing, where I had once read books on summer afternoons, still hung in precisely the same position. Dad opened the door before we rang the bell, his appearance shocking despite mental preparation. The robust figure of my memory had been replaced by a gaunt man whose clothes hung loosely on his diminished frame. Cancer had carved hollows into his cheeks and shadows beneath his eyes, yet his posture remained rigidly upright, pride evidently undiminished by physical deterioration. "Leah," he acknowledged with a slight nod. His gaze shifted to Ryan with visible disapproval. "You didn't mention you were bringing someone." "This is Ryan," I replied simply. "He's here to support me." Mum appeared behind him, her nervous hands twisting a tissue. She had aged considerably, her once carefully coloured hair now showing substantial grey, deep lines marking the corners of her mouth and eyes. Her initial step forward, arms slightly raised as if considering an embrace, halted when Dad shifted his position subtly but unmistakably into her path. "Is Jessica here?" I asked, moving past the awkward non-greeting. "She's in the living room," Mum answered, voice barely above a whisper. We told her an old family friend was visiting. The living room remained eerily identical to my memories, down to the precisely arranged decorative pillows and prominently displayed family Bible. The only changes were updated photographs on the mantel chronicling a family life that had continued without me. Adam's wedding photos, pictures of his children, and various images of Jessica at different ages created a visual timeline of my erasure. A girl sat primly on the edge of the sofa, wearing a modest floral dress that seemed better suited to a much younger child. Her dark hair matched mine at that age, though styled in a more conservative cut. She looked up with open curiosity as we entered, her eyes an exact replica of my own. "Jessica, this is our visitor Leah," Mum said carefully. "And her friend Ryan." "Hello," she responded politely, clearly schooled in proper manners for receiving guests. "It's nice to meet you." The careful distance in the introduction, the absence of any acknowledgement of our relationship, confirmed my suspicions. They had no intention of telling her the truth. The realization steeled my resolve. "Actually, Jessica, I'm not just a visitor," I said, moving to sit beside her despite my father's visible tension. "I'm your sister." Her confusion was immediate, head tilting as she processed this unexpected information. "I don't have a sister. I have a brother named Adam." "You have both," I explained gently. "I left home before you were born, but I'm your sister. That's why we have the same eyes." "That's enough," Dad interjected sharply. "Jessica, please go to your room while the adults talk." The girl hesitated, clearly conflicted between obedience and burning curiosity about this sudden revelation. Mum stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Do as your father says, Jessica. We'll explain everything later." After Jessica reluctantly departed, casting numerous backward glances, Dad indicated we should move to his home office. The room still functioned as command central for family operations, with its large desk and filing cabinets, though religious texts now occupied even more shelf space than I remembered. "That was completely inappropriate," he began once the door closed behind us. "We had an agreement about how this meeting would proceed." "No, we didn't," I countered calmly. "You made assumptions about how I would behave just as you've always done. I made no promises about perpetuating your lies." He placed a folder of legal documents on the desk, sliding them toward me with a pen. "Let's focus on the purpose of this meeting. These papers require your signature to ensure Jessica's future security." Ryan, who had remained silent but watchful, finally spoke. "As Leah's partner and a communications director familiar with legal documentation, I'd advise her not to sign anything today. We'll need our own attorney to review these documents first." "I shall." Dad's face flushed with anger despite his weakened state. "This is a family matter. It doesn't concern outsiders." "Ryan isn't an outsider to me," I replied, "and this stopped being exclusively a family matter when you involved attorneys. Now let's discuss what you've told Jessica and the community about me all these years." Mum shifted uncomfortably in her chair, eyes downcast. Dad maintained his rigid posture despite visible fatigue. "We protected her from confusion and inappropriate influences," he stated firmly. "A child needs clear moral guidance, not exposure to rebellious behavior. By telling her I stole from the church, that I was involved with drugs, those aren't protective measures. They're character assassination." His lack of denial confirmed Aunt Susan's information. Mum let out a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. "I never wanted that part," she whispered. "The elders thought a clear explanation was needed for why you never visited or called." "And so the one-sided situation." "An explanation was needed because you threw me out and changed the locks," I responded, keeping my voice steady with effort. "Because you cut off my phone service and told family members not to help me. Because you made it impossible for me to stay connected even if I had wanted to. You chose your path," Dad insisted. "Actions have consequences. That's biblical principle." "Yes, they do," I agreed. And now your actions have brought us to this moment. I won't sign these papers, not today, and possibly not ever. More importantly, I want Jessica to know the truth about who I am and why I haven't been in her life. His composure finally cracked. You want to destroy her security, her faith in her parents, all for some petty revenge. No, I said firmly, for her right to know her family history without lies, for her chance to form her own opinions. And yes, for my right to reclaim my narrative after you spent years painting me as some criminal who abandoned her family when in reality I was a teenager you threw away for wanting basic autonomy. Mum began crying openly now, her carefully maintained facade crumbling. Thomas, perhaps we should consider, with your diagnosis, might it be time for reconciliation, for forgiveness? He turned on her with surprising venom. Don't start this emotional nonsense again, Margaret. We've discussed this. Boundaries must be maintained for Jessica's spiritual welfare. In that moment, watching their interaction, I saw with perfect clarity what I had only glimpsed as a teenager. My father wasn't merely strict or religiously zealous, he was controlling and narcissistic, using faith as a weapon to maintain dominance. My mother, though complicit, was also his victim, in many ways trained to suppress her own instincts in favour of his authority. I'm going to talk to Jessica now, I announced, standing. Not to damage her relationship with you, but to introduce myself truthfully. She deserves that much. I forbid it. Dad declared, attempting to rise, but falling back into his chair, his illness betraying his attempt at physical intimidation. You no longer have authority over me, I said quietly. You surrendered that, right when you evicted your teenage daughter and destroyed her reputation to protect your own. I found Jessica sitting on the stairs, clearly having attempted to eavesdrop on the adults' conversation. Her eyes were wide with confusion and nascent understanding. Are you really my sister? She asked immediately. I am, I confirmed, sitting beside her. And I'd very much like to get to know you if that's okay. Our conversation was brief but genuine. I shared simplified truths about our family disagreements, emphasizing that my departure had nothing to do with her. I showed her photos from my wallet, my condo, my workplace, even one of my cat Milo. Small connections, human bridges across the artificial chasm our parents had created. When Dad eventually emerged from his office, face tight with barely controlled rage, I handed Jessica my contact information. If you'd like to email me sometime, I'd love to hear about your piano playing. Your mum can help set up a way for us to correspond. Surprisingly, it was Mum who nodded slightly, a small act of defiance that spoke volumes about internal shifts possibly occurring beneath her compliant exterior. We left without signatures on legal documents, without false reconciliation, but with something more valuable truth acknowledged, and a door cracked open where walls had stood for years. During the long drive back to Portland, I felt an unfamiliar lightness. Not happiness exactly, but something adjacent to it, perhaps liberation. I had faced my past without being consumed by, it had stood firm without surrendering to bitterness. Are you okay? Ryan asked somewhere around the Minnesota border, reaching for my hand across the console. I'm better than okay, I realized aloud. For the first time, I'm completely free of their power. Not because I don't care, but because I can care without being controlled by that caring. In the months that followed, small but significant developments unfolded. Jessica and I began corresponding through supervised emails, her messages displaying increasing curiosity about my life and work. Mum occasionally added brief notes of her own tentative attempts at connection without Dad's knowledge. I consulted an attorney regarding the inheritance documents, learning that my father's concerns were largely exaggerated. With proper estate planning, Jessica's interests could be protected without requiring me to formally renounce family connections. This suggested the document's true purpose had been symbolic, rather than practical, a final attempt at controlling my narrative. Dad's health declined rapidly, and he passed away 4 months after our meeting. I chose not to attend the funeral sending flowers, instead, with a card, expressing sincere condolences to Jessica and Mum. This decision prioritized genuine healing over performative reconciliation, a choice the 19-year-old version of me could never have made. The journey from eviction to wholeness had taken 13 years and countless painful lessons. I had learned that family can be chosen as well as born, that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, and that reclaiming your narrative is sometimes more important than changing someone else's mind. My parents' most devastating act hadn't been the eviction itself, but the attempt to control who I was allowed to be in their story. By returning to face them on my own terms, I had broken that final hold they maintained. The letter that had initially shattered my peace ultimately delivered an unexpected gift, complete liberation from seeking validation I would never receive. In my Portland studio, I created a new mixed media piece titled Reclamation, using fragments of my father's letter alongside childhood photographs, college rejection notices, and images of my current life. I transformed painful history into something with meaning and beauty, not erasing the past, but integrating it into a more complex and truthful whole. Sometimes doors close not to punish us, but to redirect us to paths better aligned with our authentic selves. The family that evicted me could never have imagined the woman I would become, without their constraints, the life I would build from the ashes of rejection. That transformation stands as living testimony that sometimes our greatest strength emerges precisely when others expect us to break. Have you ever had to reclaim your own story after someone else tried to define you? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more journeys of resilience and self-discovery. Remember, sometimes the family we create matters more than the one we're born into. Thank you for listening to my story.